Hello everyone, welcome to Simulation. We are currently at the Blockchain for Social Justice conference. We have partnered up with them to conduct some interviews on what is a very important conversation around both social justice and blockchain technology. And we are currently sitting down with Sheryl Davis.
Hi.
Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Greatly appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
So you are the Executive Director of the San Francisco Human Rights Commission.
That is correct.
HRC.
HRC, sometimes confused with Hillary Rodham Clinton, sometimes confused with Housing Rights Committee, so sometimes confused with Human Rights Campaign, but we're the Human Rights Commission.
And tell us a bit about your path that got you to where you are today.
Right, so I actually started as a kindergarten teacher. I was a kindergarten teacher in an all-boys school in Pacific Heights in San Francisco, but I was living in the Western Addition, Fillmore area of San Francisco. So not far from each other, but working in private school, living in a community that was kind of surrounded by public and subsidized housing. There was a police station a couple blocks over, and so when I would walk home from work, I could literally see how the blocks would start to change the closer I got to home. And so I started doing some volunteer work in the Western Addition where I lived to kind of absolve myself from the guilt from, working in a school with more affluent children when I knew that there was a need in the neighborhood I lived in.
Let's visualize this for people that aren't so familiar with this, because we're talking Western Addition to Pacific Heights in San Francisco is what, a mile, 20-minute walk?
Yeah.
20-minute walk?
15, 20-minute walk.
And along that walk, the socioeconomic status goes from less than $100,000 per family to multi-million-dollar per family. And so the change of people having a apartment to people owning a vast home, and that's up on the hillside overlooking the bay versus down in the city. So this is a very interesting, you see this every single day as you go and teach the kindergarten class and come back.
I mean, you could see the difference even from, if I was thinking about it in terms of stores, retail, or in terms of food stores,
food stores.
So when I start at the top, I'm seeing more high-end, $20 for a hamburger. And then when I get closer to home, it's Burger King, right? Or I remember going in the store one time, and I've frequented a couple of stores. I bought some stuff there, always on sale, I shall say. But, like a dress for $300, and then I get close to home, and there's a Goodwill. That's the store that's there. So just, you can literally see block by block how things go. They start to change. Yeah, so I worked in Pacific Heights. I started volunteering in the Western Addition, volunteered at a couple of different community centers, one of which was the African American Art and Culture Complex, where our now mayor-elect was working, did some volunteer work with her, and was asked to help develop out the summer program for that community center. And so the program that I worked on for that community center, the District 5 supervisor came to that event and said, "This is really great, it's awesome, we've got quite a few community that typically aren't engaged in this space. Would you really help me? Would love for you to come work in my office, help me build out my community relations, build up the work with the constituents while someone was out on paternity leave." So I went and worked in the District 5 supervisor for a few months. And then there was a program similar to the work that I was doing in the supervisor's office that was going to launch in the public defender's office. And I was encouraged to apply for that job, went to the public defender's office, applied for this job to develop a program that was focused on building partnerships between community-based organizations, city agencies, community stakeholders. And that was around 2006. And I launched a program called Mo Magic. Mo because the Western Addition used to be known as the Fillmore or the Mo.
The Mo.
And the community wanted to call it Mo Magic. Magic stood for what the Public Defender's Office called Mobilization of Adolescent Growth in Our Community. So it was focused on how do we support young people, how do we create pathways and pipelines out of poverty, but also to avoid prison and incarceration.
Yes.
So I did that for 10 years.
What an important combination. Both the pipeline for prosperity and career success and happiness, but also away from the prison system.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And so what were those pipelines, just out of curiosity?
So, one of the first things that started in November 2006, and then right around summer of 2007, just before the beginning of the summer, there was a series of shootings in the neighborhood. And that really galvanized the community to say, what are we going to do if this is happening and we're not at summer yet? So let's really be intentional about what we're doing for our young people. And that forced the service providers to come together. And we started a series of things like mentor series, where we started then taking young people from the Western Addition to visit tech companies, to meet with people who were in the industry, to think about that as a career opportunity, to be able to envision themselves in that space.
You see it, you can be it.
Exactly, right? And then we also started to say, like, let's do some training and workshops that do hands-on so that they're learning this, right? So that by the time they graduate from high school, they can consider pathways and have a more concrete of the idea of it. So that was one. Another was family engagement around literacy. So we started, I started this, having come from being a teacher, books and literacy were really important to me. So we started buying books for all the service providers that were offering summer programs. And then that has since grown to actually doing curriculum, because we had a lot of people say, look, we're a rec center. Kids come here, they play ball. What do you want us to do with these books? So then we get the books and say, this is what parents can do. This is what service providers can do. This is what young people can do. And started getting books like, there's a book called Ada Twist the Scientist, which has an African-American girl as the lead in the book, and talks about like her experimentation and all the stuff she does as a scientist. There's another one called Iggy Peck the Architect, which is about a kid who loves to build with like diapers and pancakes, and again, just this idea of STEM. So infusing that and saying playing with Legos is STEM, right? Just getting to have those conversations. And then another one is just this overall internship program. So those were kind of critical. Like, how do we build up the service providers that are working in this community? How do we give them the resources to do this work? And then how do we build up the young people? So that was kind of the heart of it. And then it was simple things that we take for granted, where we raised money to take every kid in the neighborhood to Great America or to Santa Cruz. So literally 10 bus loads of kids at one time, 700 kids from the neighborhood going to those places. So we were building community, we were building the village, because Boys and Girls Club knew kids from the YMCA knew the public housing kids, everybody on a bus together. Spending the day in community, which has now grown to every Wednesday during the summer. All 700 of those kids from around the neighborhood come together and do some activity throughout the city. So from that, I was asked to run a community center, and was doing the community center work, and then started serving on the Human Rights Commission. And then from there, when the director of the Human Rights Commission left, was asked to go into that space while the city looked for a new director, and then ultimately was asked to stay in that position.
All the variables that go into socioeconomic status and trying to help people.
Oh my goodness, it's huge.
Yeah, and especially when you figure things out like mentorship, like building the community together, seeing it, being it, traveling to places like Santa Cruz, getting the kids out and by the ocean and getting a little bit of nature, and being able to go on that field trip together, fundraising for that purpose, fundraising for the purpose of visiting tech centers.
We've been fortunate. I mean, we've done, the internship program has grown, so now it's like 150 kids every summer that are 14 to 24, with an additional 30 students who actually, college-age students who lead these cohorts.
Awesome.
And last year, we were able to take a group to Hong Kong to talk about like the work that they did. They presented at a research conference. Stanford just did a study on the program and just really looked at the impact that being engaged has on the trajectory for young people, and doing it earlier changes how they see themselves, but it also changes how others see them. It's interesting because we take what ordinarily folks would think of as the worst kid, or not the best, or not the most academic, and engage with them over the summer. And at the end of the summer, people will say, well, you picked the cream of the crop. And I'll be like, they were the cream of the crop, but maybe people didn't see that initially. And the kids have developed apps for the police department that they thought would help with folks who were afraid to tell because they thought they would be thought of as a snitch. So they've developed apps with the police department. They've developed the social media for the police to try and improve community and police relations. So it's also been this tool to address community safety, but at the same time helping them develop their skills.
Whoa. Yeah. The idea of getting these skills and then seeing how they build, what they build with the skills in their communities. Yeah. I can't fully wrap my head around it because I haven't lived there. And I really want to try and wrap my head around it as best as possible and immerse myself in the shoes of people behind their eyes of what it's like to not have the resources and tools needed in order to prosper, to not be able to have the opportunities needed to see people in the positions that you get excited about and then go and strive to build something. So this passion for social justice, where, what part of you, like what part of your values does it really ring? So
when I started, working, I did an internship in the school that I ended up teaching in. And it was the first job I had that I wasn't like, when is the day going to be over? Right? Like that when I looked at the clock and it was the end of the day, I was like, this is amazing. So I took the job, but then when I started to come face to face with the realities of where I was working versus where I was living, I was like, I've got to do something. And I think that was embedded in my lived experience of having moved around a lot. I went to like 8 different schools between kindergarten and 12th grade. And having to always be the new person or having to always try and prove who I was, or knowing that in some of the communities where I went to school that I was treated better or seen differently because of my family makeup or because of what I had access to. And I think something triggered when I started working in this school and started volunteering in community and just realized I was working with kindergarten boys who, this was a while ago, but like we were doing Hyper Studio and like these kind of the larger compact disc things, laser disc work, and kindergarten boys were like getting on their computers and doing the early versions of PowerPoint. And I was working in community with 5th graders who had never turned a computer on, let alone had access to do that work. Yeah. And I was like, how are they going to be able to compete?
Yes.
Like, how are we ever going to address what separates us if the divide just keeps getting larger and larger? And so I think at that moment, something triggered for me because I was trying to do an activity with a 5th grader that I had done with my kindergarten boys. Yeah. And the 5th grade girl wrote, it was supposed to be like 5 slides, kind of an autobiography thing. And like her slide said, Winnie the Pooh is my friend. She was 5th grade and not one word was spelled correctly, not even the. And I just was like, what am I doing, right? How can I do this work? The world is growing, technology is changing so fastly. These boys she's older than these boys, but she's way further behind than them. And every year they're gonna get more and more advanced. And at that point, something just triggered with me, and that was 15 years ago. And something triggered in me to say, like, I've gotta do something, you've gotta do something to support this population. And so that became this idea of, there are so many resources and so many opportunities in this community where I work. What does that look like to translate or to bring those resources into the community where I live? And how do we begin to realize and recognize that sometimes folks really just don't even know how far behind they are, and they don't know what resources they don't have. And so that became, okay, well, even if I get the resources to her, what does that do for the teachers or the educators or the parents? Like, we can't just look at one piece of it. We have to look at the whole thing. And so that was kind of the triggering for me. And I think the other piece was that I felt like when I look back over my experience, academic and in school and out of school, like there was nobody that really, in the school day, that was there for me. And I didn't do a lot of after school programs. And I was like, I was fortunate to have a support, a family network, a community support that was like, the expectation is you go to college, the expectation is you'll be self-sufficient. And when I looked at some of the other people, the sense of hopelessness in families or in community compounded the fact that there were no resources, and we just really needed a holistic approach.
I can't even start to understand what it's like to have a fifth grader and a kindergartner where the fifth grader is behind technologically to the kindergartner.
Yeah.
And that's just because of socioeconomic status.
Right.
Access to tools and resources,
Right.
access to mentors that are teaching the programs. And that puts people on completely different life outcome trajectories. Yeah. So it's the connection to the tool at a younger age, to being able to access a computer or a little bit of biology, technology, whatever it is, can they get access to it at a younger age? And can they have mentors around them? Can they have a system that fosters their creativity and their passions at younger ages? I'm really happy that you brought that up, because I don't think we think about it like that enough. Kindergarten versus fifth grader, and the fifth grader was actually further behind technologically than the kindergartner. That really puts it into perspective, because you're like, shouldn't all fifth graders be at the certain level of ability to use a computer and ability to interact with other humans to a level where they're, spelling correctly or using correct grammar or whatever it may be. Wow.
Yeah.
I see how that's really pushes you forward to want to get involved. Me too.
Right.
Me too. How about the connection to blockchain technology? Where can that really help with social justice?
I think in a lot of different ways. I was saying, I was thinking about this earlier. There are a lot of folks who go through different programs, whether it's mental health programs, whether it's workforce training, whether it's education programs. And sometimes we're not sure what a certificate means or what they've actually done, but this idea of using it to, as this much more evolved and superior kind of database of sorts that's actually a way to transfer information and document information is huge, especially for people that are trying to prove that they've done something, whether it's they've come from another state or another country and they need to prove that they've got the experience. But the two things that I've seen most recently was people trying to get jobs. One, a transgender woman who was struggling with being able to prove who they were, right? In terms of what experiences they've had, where they've been, where they've worked, where they've gone to school, and having to document that as like their information and their data, and having it be attached to them versus attached to a name or a certain point in time.
Yeah.
And then the other was a young woman who had gone to UC Berkeley, had, amassed some debt there and was trying to get a job and needed to prove that she had gone to UC Berkeley and could not get the copy of transcripts until she paid the debt, but wasn't going to be able to get the job if she didn't prove that she had been to school. And so these two institutions being able to talk to each other and like what that looks like and how that impacts people's ability to move forward.
That is so screwed up.
Right?
Both of those scenarios are screwed up, but especially I can't get my transcript to get a job to pay off my debt until I pay my debt. No, that doesn't make any sense. That we need to actually have logical conversations about student debt, because right now it's not quite logical enough. We're just funneling kids into the education system, throwing them in $200K worth of debt and saying good luck, have fun when you get out of here. And that's horrendous, and so is people's identity being tied to different names if they transition in some way, if they change their name in some way. All of a sudden, that data about them, it can be more difficult to go back and access and find. So having an immutable digital ledger that's decentralized is very helpful for keeping all this data about ourselves, helping us get work, helping us. Actually, I heard this when you guys were talking on stage a little bit ago. I never thought about the importance of retention of land. We've been talking about it a lot, the retention of land, but I never thought about it in terms of like 1776 until 2018, because there were so many people that were kicked out of the land that they had due to manifest destiny. It's been happening for since civilization started, with manifest destiny happening. But now this technology is in place so that at least moving forward now, there's no people can't just disappear and their land will just be taken by the ones with guns.
No, I think that to me, like when I think about the impact of redevelopment agency, or even like the Native Americans and like whose land is it and who was here first, or some of that, I think that there's some benefit to this notion of like how are we tracking things, and who, like there's, even with the prospects, right? Like the prospectors back during the 49ers and the gold rush, and like who got where first and who discovered gold first. And I think that there's some level of intellectual property more and more, that it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out. Because I think about when a lot of the tech boom, and even as people in other industries are doing things now, and sometimes your boss will say to you, intellectual property, anything that you create on my time, the organization or the business owns it, and how does that play out? And I think there's some hope for, as we move forward in the future, that people get paid for the work that they do, and that other folks don't get to co-opt it because of where they were when they created it. And if nothing else, you at least get credit for the fact that you created it. So I think that there's room for that, because what has happened, what we see with artists, and if we think about it in terms of the 60s and the 70s, when music, and there was this confusion about like whether the artist created the music or whether the label created the music, and folks that got played out of their royalties, and what we look at what happened with Stack Records and other places that kind of went out of business because they couldn't really prove who was doing what, or there was all these disputes about where the money should go. And all of these artists that are now broke because they never got the money that they were due from the work that they did.
With intellectual property, it becomes a conversation about how do we keep that decentralized digital ledger, and then how do we also provide the artist or creator with their share of the profits, as well as the ledger, seeing where money's going, where the sales are. And I think it helps a lot with us moving forward to have something that's more transparent moving forward for land, for ownership of IP. Okay. A couple quick questions that we usually ask on the show. One of the questions is about wealth inequality and globalization. So as we see, everyone at the bottom is slowly coming up from socioeconomic status, but the people at the very top are going crazy fast upward. Are you concerned about what's going on in the middle and of socioeconomic speciation maybe, and how related to globalism are we going to be able to handle that as certain places are focused on geopolitical leadership while others are focused maybe on more the we are one mentality? Right.
It's interesting. I've got the economist Derek Hamilton from New School, who's been doing a lot of work around the federal jobs guarantee and baby bonds, and he wrote an article for The Guardian called Race Still Trumps Race. Race still trumps income, right? And this idea of the wealth divide and what we're having. And so we're trying to have more conversations, because I feel like there is a disconnect in these conversations from the folks in the middle and kind of on the lower socioeconomic status. Like we're really having San Francisco is losing its middle class by most accounts, right? Like it's becoming the city of the extremely wealthy or the really poor, and that the middle class is being forced out. And yet nobody's really having the conversations. Like we're having the protest against the really rich, and they were advocating for the really poor, and the people in the middle are being lost. And it's a hard conversation to have, because in San Francisco, the people in the middle are like $100,000 to $200,000. And so for folks outside of that, that's like, outside of the Bay Area, that's like, wow, that's a lot of money. What do you mean that's middle income? And I think it's hard sometimes to talk about the folks in the middle. We are losing the middle class. We're not having deep enough conversations about it, and we don't really know what that looks like. I think that there's a lot of conversation around automation and how that's going to impact the lower wage earners and whether that's going to help bring them up. But as the lower wage earners come up, and as we do more automation, the people that have invested in that continue to increase their profits. And then the globalization piece, like how does this all impact, especially now with what we see going on with the tariffs and everything else back and forth, like what does this mean in terms of the developing and creating work here, but then also in terms of service delivery that's happening outside. And so becoming we are one when we're already becoming so divided in just day-to-day conversation, it's really hard. I mean, we've had to have difficult conversations about immigration in certain communities of color where they're like, does that mean that you've forgotten about us if we talk about, like, as we bring people in or as we talk about how do we support immigrants, what does that mean about the folks who are living here, and does that mean that you're forgetting about us? And if we talk about middle income without talking about the layers of immigration status or whether you're a person of color or geographic region, like those things. So just, it's my roundabout way of saying I don't know that those conversations are easy to have, and I don't know how we're going to actually move them forward because people are so divided on them.
Seems to be the most pressing issues that society is facing right now, is figuring out how to work together and how to deal with all the exponential technology that's happening and how it's going to be affecting us. And if we don't quickly become a very good parent to all of these technologies, then the child of this technology that are being born are going to be reflective of who we are, and we don't really treat each other that well right now.
It's a very scary thought, actually.
Yeah, we were just talking to Mo Gaudat last night, and a really interesting way to look at it is if there's a single tweet that's sent out by Trump or whatever, the AI doesn't really care as much about that as when it looks at the 30,000 replies to that tweet that are all hate speech and all this kind of stuff. It's going to be like, oh, great, this is how I will learn. Yeah. Wonderful.
Right. Yeah. It's funny, we just had an election here in San Francisco, and the mayor-elect that won't take office until July, and I was just surprised how much negativity came out of just the person isn't even serving as mayor yet.
There was a lot of negativity about London Breed already.
Yeah. Yeah, and so I've seen some people who've said they've shut their social media down because they're like, they just couldn't believe that it already was so negative and she's not even in office yet. They're like, can we just at least celebrate that we have elected the first African-American woman to be the mayor? They're like, can we just celebrate that before we talk about how horrible she is? Because we don't know that she's horrible because she hasn't even done the job yet. But it's... So just to your point, this idea of the responses and the replies, and sometimes it's not even to anything that's happened yet.
Do you believe that we are alone in the cosmos?
Do I believe? This I have to tell you, lately I kind of stay up wondering about things like that, and then I'm like, you're thinking too much, because it's like, I'm like, I wonder if there are other people, or individuals or beings sitting around wondering what's going on planet Earth. And then I also go back to this idea that, we're all created by some other being, right? Like that technology is advanced somewhere else and that they're watching us and going, gosh, we made a mistake. Yeah, I have these moments of I've maybe watched too many sci-fi movies and that I'm waiting for the ship to come back and take, all the folks who follow the rules and leave the rest.
Really fun thought experiments. They stretch our imaginations and our creative potential, our understanding of the way things work. Do you think we're in a simulation?
That has like a couple of times I've kind of been like, maybe that, and then I go back and forth over whether this is like the reincarnation piece, right? And whether all of those things scare me and I have to stop thinking about it because I'm like, I don't know if I want to come back as a bug because I'm so scared of bugs and maybe I haven't been nice to bugs. So, there are all these different things. My mind goes off on a tangent. And so the simulation kind of scares me because then I'm like, I wonder if anybody wants to be me, right? When they're in that, it's just, all my mind goes all these places and I'm like, maybe I don't want to do that. But I'm often always thinking like, is somebody watching, like with all the new like technology and the TV shows and the movies that basically show like every time you walk out of a building, somebody can see you. And every time for that reason, I don't have Alexa. I don't like to use Siri. I'm like always afraid that somebody's still monitoring everything.
They have intelligent classroom monitoring systems in China now.
Really?
I was just watching a video about it last night.
Really?
Just looking at all of the kids in the classrooms, counting their attendance, watching their facial expressions, watching how often they raise their hand, seeing how much they're paying attention, analyzing their scores.
Wow.
All of that. And that is straight up mind-blowing that that's already happening.
Wow.
Yeah, because when I was in school, and that was literally 10 years ago, I was still in high school, 10 years ago, when they were reading RKZ Sakyan, because they didn't know how to say my name, and I'd be like, here, right?
Yeah.
When that happened, I never once thought that 10 years down the line, we'd have intelligent classroom monitoring systems that see facial recognition of whether I'm in the class or not. I don't think anybody in our high school was thinking about that. And now it's up to us to teach high school kids around the world that that is happening. That way they gain a better understanding of the world that they live in and the world that we're entering and how to really figure things out, because it's looking like a lot of it's becoming very complicated and very Big Brother-esque and Big Sister-esque. Last question is, what do you think is the most beautiful thing in the world?
So I would, I'm a mom. My son just finished his freshman year of college. And I would say like the immediate thing, like the first thing that came to my head is his success. Like that's the most beautiful thing. Like that's the thing that brings me the most joy, right? And then beyond that is like the people that I've worked with, when people find success as they define it, not as we define it, like that's a beautiful thing. Because with success comes a level of pride and a level of joy internally that exudes and people see that. So that is a beautiful thing.
Yeah. I'm imagining your son actually focused on his success and happiness in college versus me. I got kicked out of the dormitories after my freshman year.
I joke that, I got lucky that he, had some challenging times and different things. And so he spent a lot of time in the library. I'm like, I don't know, next year he'll be roommating. He'll have a roommate that's a friend. So I'm like, we'll see. But I think for me, it's the success, not necessarily academically, and this is what he and I have talked about for years, but the success of being able to walk into a room and be confident in who you are.
Exactly.
And speak your truth. And so I've never been big on grades or that stuff hasn't mattered to me as much as, are you okay with you?
Yeah.
Right? So if you're okay with who you are at this moment and at this time, life is good.
Yeah, exactly. And how does one go about the journey of being able to find out that essence about themselves and then carry around that confidence everywhere they go?
Because that's a hard thing. I think that those are the times that hurt me the most, when he's struggling with who he is or with a decision and how to move forward from that. So those have been like my biggest pain points when I look back and go, I can't do that for him. He has to do it himself. And when he does it, it's a sweet day.
Heck yes. Sheryl, thank you so much for coming on to the show.
Thank
we
you
greatly
for the
appreciate you. Thank you. And we learned a lot. We have a lot to still do about social justice, providing these tools and opportunities to more kids around the world, and getting them actualized at younger ages, and being able to leverage technologies like blockchain in order to help augment the way that we build our future. So thank you. Thank you everyone for tuning in. If you guys had a good time, make sure to comment below with your thoughts. Make sure to take this content and go create with it. Don't just consume it, but go make something, go make a video, go write something about it, go share it with other people. Just 2 people, go and talk to 2 other people about what you learned today, and they'll go tell 2 people, and all of a sudden we'll have a nice little movement rolling. Subscribe, join the family, join us on Patreon so we can continue coming to cool places like Blockchain for Social Justice, getting these interviews and showing you this content. Thank you everyone, and we'll see you soon. Peace.